So basically, they copied the World Bank, they copied the IMF. And I want to make 2 points. Number one, it's not like the BRICS popped up 6 months ago and said, hey, we're going to have a new currency. It's like Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland putting on a play. This has been in the works for 17 years. And it's typical Russian, Chinese. They kind of run a show, very methodical. So they duplicated the World Bank. They duplicated the IMF. Now they have applicants for membership, and there are, I think, 21 or more countries who have applied. Well, 7 have formally applied for membership. They filled out their college essay and they want to be members. And then another 13 or 14 on the waiting list, so to speak, and will perhaps eventually become members. But when you add those in, some of these will be admitted in August 22nd. That's the next big meeting, starting with Saudi Arabia. So what happens when you let Saudi Arabia into the BRICS, given the other members? You have 2 of the 3 largest oil producers in the world, Russia and Saudi Arabia. You have 2 of the 3 largest nuclear arsenals in the world, Russia and China. You have, throwing India in, and some others, you have about 50% of global population, 54% of global GDP using purchasing power parity. You can debate the method, but just if you do purchasing power parity, you get over half of GDP, 30% of the global land mass. I could go on and on. My point is that I learned development economics in the 1970s. We had something called the third world. It was Russia or Soviet Union and the US. And then there was the third world. And all you knew about them was they were poor and, you had to get them off the runway. We actually had the runway theory of how you grow. Turned out to be wrong, but that's what we learned. Well, this is not the old third world. These are not basket cases. These are many of the biggest economies in the world that collectively have enormous power, natural resources, gold reserves, landmass, population, military. And again, I could go down the list, but this is a bloc that is as powerful in its own way by a lot of these metrics as the collective West, which I would call, US, Canada, Western Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and a few others. So that's who this group is. Now, there are a couple other groups that may join forces with the BRICS. There's something called the Eurasian Economic Union. Everyone's like, what the heck is that? Well, that's the EEU was Putin's answer. This has been around for a long time. This goes back to the early 2000s. This was Putin's answer to the EU. He said, well, you got the EU, we got the EEU. Now it's Russia and some Central Asian republics. I'm not, Belarus and Tajikistan. I'm not saying this is France, Germany, and Italy, but it is a group that have reduced tariffs and improved trade between themselves. And there's another powerful group called the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, led by China. And these are mostly Central Asian republics, including Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan and some others. But they're all talking to each other. Now, what's the common denominator? Well, it's basically Russia and China. China's a member of 2. Russia's the only country in the world that's a member of all 3. So through pretty simple inference, you could say, hey, Russia and China are running the show. And it's very likely that when this new currency plays out, that those other countries will join in. When you do that, and I found a really cool widget. It's a map of the world that's blank, and you can go country by country and fill in by color. Just click on it and give it a color. And I did that. And I was like, oh, okay, here's the BRICS, it's 5 countries or whatever. Well, here are the applicants, it has another 20. Here's the SCO, a few more. Some of them are members of both. Here's the EEU, has a few more. Again, many are members of both. And you keep going. And all of a sudden, like a light bulb goes on. I said, that is Halford Mackinder's global island, what he called the world island. And this goes back early 20th century, probably greatest geopolitical theorist in history. You got to read his book if you haven't read it. It's pretty short. But he had this idea of the world island. That is exactly what they're building. Now, why is that important other than the obvious, which is more collective economic and population power? By the way, output of wheat, pick your metric. This dominates the world. Well, for one thing, if you're going to have a currency union, the more countries you have, the more likely you are to be successful. Why? Let's just kind of digress for a second. And what are the headlines saying? Again, you correctly said, haven't we been talking about this for 10 years? Well, yeah, actually we have. But in the past year, what are the headlines? China and Saudi Arabia are talking about selling oil for yuan. Brazil and China do large multi-product currency deal where they accept each other's currency. UAE, China, same thing, selling oil for yuan. Russia, China, using yuan and rubles as payment methods for whatever they sell to each other. Russia sells natural resources, China sells semiconductors, manufactured goods, and so forth. And there are a number of those. I don't have to list them all, but there are 10 or 15 of these. The reason they've all fallen short, and very few of them have actually come to fruition despite the headlines, is when you have two countries and they're going to trade with each other and accept each other's currency, and you can do that, you're limited to what you can do with that currency. This is why the Russia-India thing is starting to break down. Russia's been pumping oil to India. India's been paying in rupees, but how much curry do you need? I mean, and Russia's starting to balk. They're like, hey, we're up to our eyeballs in rupees. We need a better system. Well, when you have a multilateral, multi-country currency union, that problem goes away. Russia sells oil to China. China pays in BRICS, the BRIC currency, pays you in BRIC. But Russia can take the BRIC and turn around to Argentina and say, we'd like to buy, or Brazil maybe, and we'd like to buy some Embraer aircraft. And Brazil gets the BRIC currency, and they can turn around to China and say, we'd like to buy some rice. And then China takes, et cetera. And so you've solved the quasi-barter problem. Mm-hmm. You've solved the problem of what to do with a pile of currency that you really can't use other than certain goods and services, but not everything you want. And there's an analyst who's brilliant. I read his stuff all the time. I'm like, man, you're so smart. And I just really follow him very, very closely and give him a lot of credit. But he came out a few days ago, maybe a week, and said he'd heard about this and he was kind of dismissing. He said, you can't have a currency union without a common fiscal policy. And I said, I don't want to mention his name, but I said, have you not heard of the euro? I mean, there is no common fiscal policy in Europe. Don't tell me that Italy has the same fiscal policy as the Netherlands or that Germany has the same fiscal policy as Greece. They don't. They do have a central bank that issues the currency, has a little bit of gold, but not a lot relative to the size of the economy. But there's no common fiscal policy and there's no common bond market. To this day, there's no such thing as a bond, I'll call it a euro bond, backed by the full faith and credit of the entire European monetary zone. It doesn't exist. You can buy German bonds in euros, you can buy Italian bonds in euros, but you can't buy a euro bond backed by all those countries. So they don't have a common bond market, and they don't have a common fiscal policy, but they do have a currency union that's very successful. They finally have the scale. They finally solved this problem, which I described, which kind of is not, when you got two countries, you're not too much further ahead than barter. But with 30 countries or 40 countries, you've solved that problem.